Hello everyone! Guess what? It's a new year, but we're still talking about the old year. Here are the movies that I saw last month that I didn't review. I'm going to talk about some Christmas movies, although most of them are sort of Christmas movies, Christmas-ish movies, not about the holiday per se, but they're set at Christmas time, or they have a significant Christmas sequence. But before I get to that, here are a bunch of movies that have nothing to do with Christmas. And if I sound a little, I don't know, congested, it's because I'm dealing with a sore throat thing. Hopefully, today's Tuesday. Yes, Tuesday. Hopefully, by the time I post this video on Saturday, I'll be fine. What else I saw in December, movie number 1, is 2019's Jojo Rabbit. A 10-year-old devotee of Adolf Hitler finds himself conflicted when he discovers his mother is hiding a Jewish girl in their house. This film touches several bases: Bildungsroman, first love, the horrors of war. I'd describe it as a tragicomedy. That's a tricky genre, as it's hard to strike the right balance of hilarity and heartache. I would say at least 90% of the time, this movie hits it. The first half is light, showing Jojo's comical struggle to be a courageous member of the Hitler Youth, his relationship with his mom, played with defiant joie de vivre by Scarlett Johansson, his relationship with Adolf, his imaginary friend, played by writer, director, and producer Taika Waititi, and his initial reaction to the Jewish girl, played by Thomasine McKenzie. I think the story's fulcrum is the visit from the Gestapo, led by comedian Stephen Merchant. I won't go into details, as that way lies spoilers, but there is a lot that changes in that scene. It's pivotal for the characters and the plot, and from that point on, the film takes a much darker turn. Maybe too dark? I was shocked by how abruptly and horribly things shifted, but a lot of things in this movie are intended to jolt the audience. Jojo is an endearing protagonist. Roman Griffin Davis's face is so open and expressive as he's torn between being a little boy and being a good Nazi. Having Hitler there as the imaginary friend is a gutsy move. I've liked other Taika Waititi movies I've seen a lot, so I was excited to see what he did here. I did have my misgivings about it, but he was great. Jojo's goofy and encouraging buddy Adolf one second, raging and terrifying Führer the next. I should clarify that this isn't a kid's movie, even though a kid is the main character, and there's a lot of anti-Semitic talk. The degree of how prevalent and harsh and degrading the comments are, especially when coming from the mouth of a child, can be uncomfortable. There's obviously a point to it, but I can see it putting some viewers off. It kinda goes overboard. It's a daring film, probably divisive, and it takes some liberties with historical accuracy. I think for the most part it succeeds in being a funny satire that strikes a chord. I could have done with less Rebel Wilson, whose Nazi she-wolf is sometimes humorous but mostly distracting, but I enjoyed the anachronistic dialogue and soundtrack, where the songs aren't just from a later era but have also been translated. For example, the first one you hear is I Wanna Hold Your Hand by the Beatles, but sung in German, with Beatlemania screams played over footage of Germans going crazy over Hitler. It's insane, but effective. And there were two scene stealers who stood out. Sam Rockwell as Captain K, the jaded officer turned Hitler Youth instructor, who has one of the most moving moments in the film, and young Archie Yates as Jojo's best friend, who's 10 going on 40, a sweet kid and naturally funny. Movie number 2 is The Crowded Sky from 1960. The title refers to the mid-century surge in flight traffic, and the hook is that an airplane full of passengers, piloted by Dana Andrews, has a mid-air collision with a fighter jet piloted by Efrem Zimbalist Jr. However, while the crash sequence itself is pretty good, I don't think it's worth what you have to sit through to get to it. I seldom come away from a movie thinking, what a waste of time, but this one spent over an hour on relationship drama and personal conflicts that I didn't care about, involving characters I either didn't like or felt apathetic toward. I spent the whole movie waiting for the big event, which didn't happen until the last 15 or 20 minutes. Plotlines involve stern Square Andrews and his estranged son, and his personal rivalry with co-pilot John Carr, who strikes up a flirtation with stewardess Anne Francis, while Troy Donahue and Efrem Zimbalist Jr. get to know each other in the fighter jet, and Zimbalist reminisces about his adulterous wife, Rhonda Fleming. Keenan Wynn is in it too, as a passenger trying to chat up his neighbor, unaware they've met before. There's all this stuff, and then bang, the crash happens, resulting in surprisingly few casualties, one of them a woman with a heart condition who was going to die anyway, which should still be tragic, but feels too convenient. And then it's over so fast. The incident barely has any effect. It's like they knew the collision itself, left to the climax, wasn't enough for a whole movie, so they threw in all this other stuff to develop characters, but it just doesn't feel like it matters. The Crowded Sky, with its ensemble cast, can be seen as an influential precursor to the airport movies, just as much as 1957's 0 Hour, which also starred Dana Andrews. In fact, it has a couple similarities to Airport 1975, including that it has both Dana Andrews and Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. as pilots, but in reverse position. I got this from the internet. I have seen Airport 1975, but I don't remember this. I am planning to review the 4 movies in the Airport series, by the way. That will probably be a couple months from now, since there are a couple other movies I want to talk about first. Movie number 3 is another Dana Andrews film. I did not do this on purpose. 1956's While the City Sleeps. This was a rewatch for me, a first time for everybody else. The story is a rather complex one. A media magnate dies, leaving his empire to his profligate son, who gets the idea to set the 3 main department heads against each other in a competition to win an executive director job. To get it, they have to get the scoop on a string of serial murders and find the killer. I distinctly remember the occasion when I watched it the first time, but I didn't remember much about the movie itself, just that I liked it. I liked the flow of the dialogue and the scenes with the killer. I enjoyed it again the second time, but watching it with my family, I became very aware of how loaded with innuendo it is. It was directed by Fritz Lang, and it's got a great cast. Andrews is joined by George Sanders, Ida Lupino, Thomas Mitchell, Vincent Price, Rhonda Fleming, Sally Forrest, and John Drew Barrymore, credited as John Barrymore Jr., who plays the killer. I liked the shocking, predatory sequence that opens the movie. It's half murder mystery thriller, half witty cutthroat newspaper movie. Everybody in the business plays dirty, undercutting each other and trying some sleazy tricks to get what they want. It's a good movie, but it's kind of sordid, so I liked it, but maybe not as much as I did the first time. Movie number 4 is a documentary. That's different. One that I'd been wanting to see for some time. 2017's Bombshell, the Hedy Lamarr story. In the last year or so, I've enjoyed seeing a few of Lamarr's films, and I was intrigued by stories I heard that said there was more to her than what we saw on screen. Hedy Lamarr is considered one of the most beautiful and glamorous women of the classic Hollywood era. What she hasn't been so well known for is her intelligent, creative mind and her contribution to science. That oversight is what this documentary seeks to rectify by telling Lamarr's life story, often in her own words with audio from a long-lost 1990 interview. An Austrian refugee who fled the Third Reich, she followed the news of the war with concerned interest. After reading about yet another Allied sub getting blown up, its torpedoes rendered defenseless because German U-boats jammed their signals, she came up with a concept that came to be known as frequency hopping, which would allow a ship to communicate consistently with its torpedo and guide it to its target without getting jammed because the frequency kept changing. The invention was co-developed with a musician friend and patented, and then shelved because the United States military essentially couldn't see how to implement it. Years later it was implemented, and now it makes up an integral part of technology we use every day, Wi-Fi, GPS, Bluetooth, and so on. But because Lamarr didn't know the patent had to be renewed, her rights to the invention lapsed. She didn't receive any financial remuneration, and no recognition came until many years later. Bombshell is a comprehensive and revealing documentary. Too revealing at one point. I could have done without seeing explicit photographs of teenage Lamarr, yet somehow, perhaps because there was so much to her life story, it feels like there are periods that could have been discussed at greater length. It's a tragic story in many ways, one of frustration, loss, and disappointment, but it's an interesting one. A few animated segments are included to illustrate the story when there are no photos or video clips to insert. These may come across as a bit juvenile, but still effective, and I found the animated renderings to explain frequency hopping helpful, not being of an especially scientific mind myself. There are also interviews included with recognizable faces, among them Robert Osborne, his last before he died. Movie number 5 is one from 1939, not one of those typically associated with that year, Nurse Edith Cavell. It's a World War I story, a true story, about an English nurse running a hospital in Brussels when the Germans invade in 1914. She helps one escaped prisoner hide from the Germans and flee to the border, and that leads her and a group of other women to similar activities, hiding men in the hospital's basement until they can escape the country. It's a famous story. I'm surprised I wasn't familiar with it. Unfortunately, the print on Amazon Prime right now is very poor quality. It's watchable with subtitles, but those are only about 70% accurate. Still, even though I couldn't always understand what the actors were saying, I could tell they were giving good performances. Anna Neagle plays Edith Cavell, her low, calm voice naturally inspiring confidence and assurance. The local countess who ends up driving a truck and getting forged papers is played by the unflappable Edna May Oliver, and they're joined in their endeavors by May Robson and Zazu Pitts. And there's a smaller role for George Sanders playing a German. Oh, and surprise, the opening scenes take place at Christmas, so kind of a Christmas movie, but not really. I do think it's a good movie if you can overlook the deteriorated film quality, which isn't the movie's fault, and more importantly, it's a great true story. Movie number 6 was a rewatch of the 1938 version of A Christmas Carol, which stars Reginald Owen as Scrooge. I saw this and reviewed it in 2014 when I did my 12 Days of A Christmas Carol series. Since it was available for streaming on the TCM app, we decided to check it out again. I haven't rewatched my review of it because, yuck, I hate watching my own old videos. I do remember, though, that I didn't love it then, and it's still not a favorite. Reginald Owen's Scrooge is okay, but the course of his transition from nasty miser to cheery benevolent is lacking something for me. This is one of the lighter versions, and as such, Scrooge is made up to look less forbidding. It also spends a disproportionate amount of time with nephew Fred and the Cratchit family, including not one, not two, but 3 Lockharts, Jean, Kathleen, and June. There's also further conflict added when Bob Cratchit accidentally knocks Scrooge's hat off with a snowball and gets fired. He goes on a shopping spree with his last wages anyway and doesn't tell his wife the truth, and this extra element of irresponsibility really bothers me. That, plus the absence of a couple well-known sequences, like Fezziwig's party and Scrooge's fiancé, holds this version back. I like it well enough, it's just not a favorite. But hey, I know a lot of people for whom this version is the quintessential adaptation of A Christmas Carol. They have to watch it every year, and that's fine. If I'd grown up watching it regularly instead of the Alistair Sim version and the Muppets version, I might feel that way too. Movie number 7 had nothing to do with Christmas, but was possibly my favorite of the movies I saw in December. 1962's Escape from East Berlin, also known as Tunnel 28, a dramatic thriller about a group of people who attempt to tunnel under the Berlin Wall. German-born Robert Siodmak directed this film, which is allegedly based on real events. Don Murray stars as Kurt Schroeder, a chauffeur relatively content with his life who just wants to stay out of trouble. But when he sees a coworker shot to death for trying to escape, and that man's sister, Christine Kaufman, comes to Kurt for answers, and his family begins to dream of freedom beyond the wall, Kurt's resolution to stay is challenged. This movie was filmed in Berlin, with actual sentries unwittingly becoming extras, and that adds a feeling of authenticity. And the cast also is predominantly German, with a couple Austrian and Polish actors mixed in. Lead actor Don Murray is the sole American, which I suppose you could quibble with, but I didn't find it distracting. My mom is a fan of this movie, and of Murray. She first mentioned it to me years ago. Considering how much I enjoyed it, I should have watched it sooner. The situation is a difficult one for the protagonist, torn between wanting to please his family and to keep them safe, and not wanting to tell his coworker's sister of her brother's fate. The movie does have some moments of levity, but then the danger ramps up nicely as the family encounters one setback after another. And when the tension reaches its peak, well, I haven't been that anxious watching the movie in a while. And it was all the more effective because I didn't look the movie up beforehand and have it spoiled for me. So Turner Classic Movies did a week-long Christmas movie marathon, and the rest of the movies on this list came from that marathon, though I didn't get to watch any of them live. A couple of them were movies I'd previously been interested in, but for the most part they're movies that I'd either never heard of, or I wouldn't have thought of watching them at Christmas time. Unfortunately, I was too busy to jot down some notes after I watched them, so if my comments are on the shorter side, that's why. Movie number 8 is 1957's Desk Set, a romantic comedy starring Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, the 8th of their 9 films together. It's about a group of reference librarians who fear they're about to be replaced by a new computer. Tracy is the mysterious efficiency expert, although I think he said he's actually a different title, but I can't remember what that was, who comes to observe them at work, and Hepburn is the suspicious head of the department. There are a few themes at play here. One of them, the biggest one, is fear of becoming obsolete in the workforce and being replaced, but there's also fear of loneliness. Hepburn's character is constantly hoping her boss, played by Gig Young, who's dangled the carrot for years, will pop the question. That was the only thing that was hard for me to buy, that a character such as Katharine Hepburn plays would turn into starry-eyed mush and fall all over herself every time her boss comes around to flirt with her. But I really enjoyed the scenes when the reference ladies, including an effervescent Joan Blondell, get to show their stuff. I guess that's the nerd in me. And the events, including a boozy office party, take place before, during, and shortly after Christmas, hence, it's a Christmas movie. Movie number 9 is 1935's Kind Lady, in which an unmarried society woman's generosity is taken advantage of by a downtrodden artist she encounters on Christmas Eve. He cons her into allowing his friends into her home, and soon they take over. Frankly, it's not the nicest movie for the holiday season. Aileen McMahon plays the wealthy target, and she gives a fine performance as a victim who refuses to give up and proves she's not quite as helpless as she seems. Basil Rathbone, of course, is excellent as a man who seems to be decent at first, but as the plot is revealed, he becomes quite sinister. The rest of the characters, Rathbone's band of cons and hangers-on, are a little quirky, even when they're being vicious. The situation the protagonist finds herself in here is really awful, and Rathbone is ruthless, but his cronies are just odd enough to keep things from getting too serious. Movie number 10 is 1949's Come to the Stable, a more wholesome film inspired by a true story. Loretta Young and Celeste Holm play a pair of nuns who have come over from France after the war, intent on keeping a promise to God and building a children's hospital. They find the ideal location on a picturesque hill in Bethlehem, Connecticut. But they have no money, and that land is owned by a mob boss who won't sell or donate. At least, that's what everyone says. What follows is an engaging film, as these two determined nuns, driven by optimism and faith, refuse to take no for an answer. Celeste Holm is especially charming as Sister Scholastica, who barely speaks any English, along with Elsa Lanchester as the fretting, impoverished artist the nuns end up staying with, and Thomas Gomez in his brief appearance as Luigi Rossi. Only the first part of the film is set at Christmas, but it counts, and co-star Hugh Marlowe as the well-to-do composer neighbor who starts out very polite but gets increasingly irate over the nuns' interference in his life, which leads to some very funny scenes, experiences a climactic change of heart, something that's been a common theme of holiday tales since A Christmas Carol. Movie number 11 was another rewatch, Penny Serenade, a tearjerker from 1941 that stars Irene Dunne and Cary Grant as a married couple on the brink of separation after experiencing a series of struggles in their efforts to have and then adopt a child. I hadn't thought of this as a Christmas movie, but there is a significant sequence with a Christmas pageant. Viewer be warned, this is a sad movie. I don't think I cried the first time I saw it, but that might have been because I was with my mom, and my pride or my self-consciousness or whatever you want to call it doesn't allow me to freely express film-invoked sadness when I'm with another person. So, as a means of experimentation, and because I wasn't sure I'd watch the whole thing because it's almost 2 hours long and I didn't really have time for that, I watched it by myself the second time. And yes, I cried. I cried quite a bit. This is the third or fourth Irene Dunne movie to make me emotional. Both she and Grant got a lot of attention for their comedic skills, which are present here. It is a funny movie, especially the part when she tries to give a baby a bath for the first time. But this is a fine showcase of their dramatic talents as well, especially Grant's. I've heard it said that this and Room for One More were of greater personal significance to Grant than any other films he made, and it was one of Irene Dunne's favorites for that reason too. And having rewatched it, I've decided it's one of the best and most genuine performances Grant ever gave. The scene in which he pleads for the judge to let them have custody of the little girl is amazing. It feels so real. That was where I lost it. Or that was where I lost it the first time. I like the way the story's told, Dunn's character reminiscing over their life together, memories prompted by records they have collected over the years, and the supporting performances from Beulah Bondi as the head of the adoption agency and Edgar Buchanan as their loyal friend Applejack, who somehow knows a little bit about everything, are wonderful. I'm glad I saw it again so I could have a clearer opinion of what I think of it, which is that it's sad, but it's totally worth it. Another movie I wanted to rewatch, and in fact I waited all year hoping that it would air in December on TCM, and it did, was 1945's Lady on a Train, the comedy starring Deanna Durbin as a mystery novel enthusiast who witnesses a murder from her train car. This is probably the most Christmassy thing here after A Christmas Carol. The film stops at one point so Durbin can sing Silent Night to her father on the phone after all. Unfortunately, even though TCM did play it and then had it on their streaming app for almost 2 weeks, I never had a chance to just sit down and watch the whole thing. Even though we didn't have a lot going on at Christmas, I still ended up being really busy, and I had a couple big projects I wanted to finish for you guys before the end of the year, and I spent a lot of time watching Joey the Baby Sea Otter's live stream because there were some big milestones in the lead up to Christmas. Baby's first Christmas, and he had his 6-month birthday, and those are big things. I didn't want to miss any of that. So I could have made some time to watch Lady on the Train, but I didn't. I did get to see the first 20 minutes and the last 20 minutes and a couple chunks in the middle, though, so that was nice. And there's always next Christmas. That's the list of what else I saw in December. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think of any of the movies I mentioned if you've seen them in the comments below, and I'll be back next time. Thanks for watching.